So Pure Advantage is not a full-blown strategy that the people involved are wanting to sort of sell to the government or sell to the public of New Zealand at large. Rather, it's about seeing and understanding this radical shift in the way we see the threats to us in the world, but also the opportunities when we start to think about closing all sorts of wasteful loops in the world, relating very differently to the natural resources, and working far more symbiotically with the ecosystem itself. Let me just end on two New Zealand stories about how this is already underway. Last week in Italy, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization held its annual meeting, discussing things like the need to increase global food output by 40% in the next 20 years and by at least 80% in the next 40 years if we are to feed some 9 or 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. After that meeting, there was a gathering of 36 countries. It was a ministerial meeting of those countries in the Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Alliance. This was an initiative that New Zealand took to the 2009 Copenhagen climate change negotiations and got a lot of support. Those 36 countries are now engaged, and they represent 70% of the world's agricultural greenhouse gases. New Zealand is the secretariat for that. We lead with the Dutch on ruminant animals. The Americans lead on arable farming, and the Japanese lead on rice paddy farming. This is now our largest international science commitment and engagement. And you only need to take brief stock of the work, for example, that's going on through the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre in Palmerston North, Harry Clark's outfit, to understand that great engagement that's going on. David Carter, our Minister of Agriculture, chaired that ministerial meeting of those 36 countries last week. He came back absolutely fizzing about the opportunities for New Zealand from this and the role we're playing internationally. Now, we are, of all the developed countries in the world, the most dependent on our natural environment for earning our living. And it's not just the primary sector, or it's not just about the tourists who come because of that. It permeates so much of what we do. So let me just close with two very different examples from New Zealand. And it's about that radical reconception of what we're trying to do in the world. The first example is an Auckland company, literally just down the road, Lanzatech, who have understood that if you could capture some of the carbon monoxide coming out of steel plants and other industrial processes like the Glenbrook steel mill, and find a way to create ethanol from that, you're producing an astonishingly effective biofuel. That's exactly what they've done. Great New Zealand investors like Stephen Tindall were the first investor. Stephen then brought in people like Vinod Khosla, arguably the world's most interesting and successful clean tech venture capitalist from California. And then on the most recent leg last year in China, they signed cooperation agreements with the Chinese Academy of Science and Bao Steel and brought in Chinese venture capital into that. So that's that incredibly important thing of closing those loops so we get far better resource use and environmental outcomes as we solve these challenges. The other example from New Zealand is the Yike bike, and I see the inventor sitting out there in the audience, Grant Ryan. This is the 150th anniversary this year of the sort of industrial production of bicycles. You might think there's not a lot you could do with a bicycle, and yet Grant and his colleagues have radically reinvented what a bike is in terms of being very foldable, very light, electric, and the like. Now, on one hand, the Chinese last year produced 23 million electric bikes. So the last thing we'd want to do is to be producing old electric bikes like theirs. But if we start to radically reinvent what we do and reconceive what the world needs, and we can offer it something different, then those opportunities are totally abundant. As C.K. Prahlad, a great economist who sadly died last year too young, wrote in the 2009 edition of the Harvard Business Review, which was devoted almost entirely to clean technology, he and his colleagues wrote that what's driving invention these days is that scarcity factor. And this, his phrase was the mother lode of invention, and this was a driver of innovation, the likes of which the world has never seen before. So, Pure Advantage is about starting that conversation so we can work out what those big goals are and we can stick to the plan. So, speaking personally, I would just urge you to go out and start that conversation. Thank you.